Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to tell you about how to pick your way through the huge genre that is literary fiction to find your new favourites, and I'm going to tell you 10 of my absolute favourite literary fiction books. I have been loving literary fiction lately, and I don't know whether it's this time of year with it being prize season and focusing more on literary fiction, but I find myself really gravitating towards them from my TBR. I've just been picking up so many and really enjoying reading them. And obviously on this channel I read all different types of genres, and I've done quite a few videos before that are focused only on fantasy or speculative fiction or different genres, but I don't think I've ever sat down and done a recommendation video just on literary fiction and talked about how to get into it if this is a genre that you don't currently read. So let's start off with defining literary fiction. It's kind of a difficult thing to define because actually it's defined by what it is not. Lots of things are literary, obviously, it's all literature, but when we're talking about literary fiction books, it's kind of defined by what it's not. These are books that are not thrillers or horrors or romance books or fantasy books or speculative fiction or historical books. It's everything else that all kind of gets bundled into one big pile together and is labelled literary fiction. But I would also define literary fiction as something that has something more unusual about its writing, or it's exploring one theme or one character or one topic very deeply and in a slightly unusual way. It can often be more internal kinds of books, focusing on a character's introspection, or have a really non-traditional, non-linear structure, or just in any other way quite an unusual writing style. For me, literary fiction is one of those things that when it hits and you can find a new favourite book. But also it's kind of difficult to know which books are actually going to be the ones that really work for you, because it's such a wide genre and it can be really easy to get turned off if you get recommended books from people who have very different taste for you in literary fiction. You might end up thinking that this genre is just not for you. And also some people think that it's harder to get into, like the books themselves are more complicated. I would actually say that's not true. I think that a lot of people find literary fiction easier in a way because it's not like a fantasy book where you're trying to remember a whole host of characters, you're trying to remember a new political system and world building and geography. If you're used to reading fantasy books and having to contain quite a lot of information, especially in the beginning portions of a book, litfic is not like that because it can be a more insular or singular story. It's not like you have to remember a lot of detail, and unless the writing itself is really incomprehensible, in that case you probably just won't like it anyway. Then actually literary fiction can be really engaging, and they're often shorter books as well, so you're having less time invested into reading them. But as always, if you don't like a book, DNF it early and DNF it with no shame, and then try something else, because I think that's a key component to finding literary fiction that works for you, is try out stuff but then don't be afraid to put it down if it's not working. So the ways that I find literary fiction that works for me is, firstly, I follow lots of prizes, even if I don't read along with every single prize. Obviously this year I am doing that with the Women's Prize for Fiction, where I'm reading the entire 16 books on the long list and I'm vlogging the whole journey, so you can watch out for those vlogs if you haven't seen them yet. But also there's the Booker Prize that goes on, the International Booker Prize, the the Consciousness Prize. There's so many different prizes and a lot of them are focused on literary fiction. There's also National Book Awards, and lots of other places will have their own different awards. Goodreads has its own award, and it is a really fun way to discover new literary fiction. I will say, depending on the prize and what the judges are literally looking for, that's going to obviously affect the books that are nominated. So Goodreads is much more of a popularity contest, and then other prizes are looking for specific things as well. My next tip is to look for very well reviewed books. I would say there is a disclaimer though to this point, because like I said, literary fiction can be so hit and miss. A lot of the time on Storygraph or on Goodreads, you can have a pretty bad average rating because people are either rating it 5 stars or 1 star, which is not as reflective of how many people have loved this book and thought it was a favourite, and how many people did not like it, didn't understand it and DNF'd it. Because lots of literary fiction can just be a love it or hate it thing. If it's hitting you, if it's talking about themes that are really personal to you, if it's exploring a character that you can relate to versus not, it's going to really affect your rating and your enjoyment of that book. I would say instead of actually putting too much value on the average ratings on these websites, I would say getting personalized recommendations from someone where they are explaining what the book is and the reasons why they love it and the reasons why you might like it too is a much better way, especially for literary fiction. I mean, that is obviously the case for all books. But basically what I'm saying is take my advice in this video and read these 10 books, because even if they've got a lower average rating, I'm going to explain to you why you'll like them. Also, once you do have some favorite authors for literary fiction, another way to find new books is to see what else they've blurbed, see what books they're talking about, see what books they're referencing, if you do find a favorite author and a favorite style. And my final bit of advice before I get into my own recommendations is that you should find your own subgenre of literary fiction. Like I said, literary fiction can be such a wide genre, but there is definitely themes and trends and different subgenres within the genre. The recent kind of subgenre of weird girl fiction is like definitely an example of this, with books like My Year of Rest and Relaxation, Boy Parts, Bunny. Like there's so many that could go into this category, but it's like a genre of its own. Or your subgenre could be sad Irish fiction, because there's also a whole genre of this as well within literary fiction. You could really be into the toxic relationships exploration, you could be into short stories, you could be really into unreliable narrators, but once you start exploring and figuring out your own subgenre, it'll be really easy to find more recommendations. And now let's move on to my recommendations for literary fiction. I have 10 books here for you today. So for my 10 books, this recommendation list, I've decided not to include the most popular literary fiction authors, like there's no Sally Rooney on this list, for example, and I've also focused on more contemporary fiction that has come out in the last few years, because I think that there's such a high churn around new books and new literary fiction, and it's important to know like what's come out recently that's really good. So all of these I think have come out in the last 5-ish years, and I'm also focusing on like more strictly literary, so we're not including dystopian or any speculative fiction or any magical realism or any horror kind of elements within that. So let's get cracking with the first book on this list, or really the first author, because I'm including Claire Keegan and all 3 of the books that I've read from Claire Keegan, and this would kind of fit into the sad Irish literature subcategory that I was talking about. So the 3 books that I have here are So Late in the Day, Foster, and Small Things Like These. I've read all 3 of these books and rated them between a 4 and a 5 star. I absolutely love these stories. Claire Keegan just has such a beautiful way of writing that feels very simplistic but almost comforting and light, even when it's talking about a difficult subject. Something about her writing just feels so hopeful, and because they're so short as well, like these books are, no word is wasted, like they are a full completed story in not a lot of pages. I would highly recommend you start here if you've never read Claire Keegan before, if you've never read any literary fiction. I would say these are beautiful, poignant stories. They're all, I think, set in Ireland. We have So Late in the Day, which is following a man who is coming home from work and basically reflecting on his life and a past relationship that he's had. Foster, that I think is my favourite one out of these 3. I'm not totally sure. It is about a child who goes to live with some of her relatives over a long hot summer in Ireland. And then for more of a winter read, you have Small Things Like These, which is set over 1 week leading up to Christmas, and you're following a man as he is uncovering some secrets about his very small, quaint town. Can't say anything much more about these other than they are beautiful, poignant, brilliantly written, and definitely check these books out if you haven't already. The next book I want to talk about is Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead. This one is such an interesting little book, and this one I would say is probably slightly less accessible than the Claire Keegan books in terms of the writing, because it does have quite a slow build up, but it is so worth it. This is one of those books that just explores everything that I love reading in a book. This is about an older woman, and she basically lives in a very rural village in Poland, and her job over the winter months is to kind of go and keep an eye on her neighbours' houses while they're away for the winter. But this book actually opens when her neighbour passes away at the very beginning of this book, and she kind of involves herself in this investigation. It sounds more like a thriller than it is. Don't go in expecting any kind of crime or thriller book, because this is a slow and steady meditation on people that are ignored in society. This woman is obsessed with horoscopes and star signs and nature and animals, and I loved her her. She was so crazy and I want to be her when I grow up. Also, Olga Tokarczuk has actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature, so if you needed any more convincing to read her books, then there is that, but this is the one that I would start with. I absolutely loved this book so much. Next up, we have one of the only books I've ever actually annotated, and that is Assembly by Natasha Brown. This book has a very interesting writing style. It feels very poetic. It feels almost stream of consciousness. Information is not given to you in a linear way, and it's kind of got a very dreamlike quality to it. In this book, you're following a young black woman who's worked really hard to get to the top of her professional career, and it explores her identity with relation to her job and also to her white boyfriend. I loved this book so much. I mean, I've highlighted so many quotes for this. It just felt like, when I was reading this, it felt incredibly current. It felt like it was putting a magnifying glass on the UK. This is set in England and it felt so unflinching, and I just absolutely loved it. I really want to reread this one and also read Natasha Brown's next book that has just come out recently, because I know that I'm going to love that as well. Also, another one that is not too long. The writing style is slightly more unconventional, but I would say that it doesn't mean that it's difficult to read. It's just something that you kind of have to begin and like let wash over you as you get used to it, but it's so worth the effort. Next up, we have another Fitzcarraldo edition, and that is Stillborn. No one is going to be surprised if you've seen lots of my videos that I have recently just been absolutely loving. Firstly, Fitzcarraldo editions in general, but also this book was one of my favorites from last year. I read this, I think, in one sitting, and I just was absolutely wrapped and couldn't stop reading it. I love this book. This book is by a Mexican author, Guadalupe Nettle, and it is basically following the lives of these two women, and they both decided that they don't want to have children, and one of the women, who we mainly follow, has decided to go as far as getting a sterilization surgery, but then soon after, her friend decides that actually she might want to know what it feels like to become a mother, and then proceeds to get pregnant. I have to warn that this book is very sad, but the bits that hit me the hardest weren't the most traumatic parts of this. This book really explores female friendship and what it can mean to take different life paths. It felt really raw. It felt really brave in a way, which feels like a weird thing to say about a book. If you're interested in discussions of motherhood and female friendship, and especially if you have a slightly more ambiguous relationship with the decision whether or not to become a mother or a parent, then I would highly recommend you read this book. There is nothing else that I've read that exactly felt like it was pinning my feelings down onto the page. I just absolutely love this book, and it made me absolutely sob, so I cannot recommend it enough. The next book is a book I haven't actually talked about much, or if ever, on any of my channels or social media. But when I think of literary fiction, this is always one that stands out in my head, and that is Pure Colour by Sheila Heti. I mean, I think you can imagine what drew me initially to this book. I absolutely love this really simplistic but very beautiful front cover, and it's almost a match for the wall in this very room. It's slightly more yellow-green. This book is definitely going to be a hit or a miss with people, and the reviews really reflect that. This is like either a 1-star or like a 4 or 5-star book for people, because it is written in a very unusual way. It's stream of consciousness, but not even that. It doesn't really focus on a main character or any main character that we know anything about. It doesn't have characters, character development. It doesn't really have a plot. It's just kind of a collection of ideas, but it's shaped around human existence, imagining it from birth to death. But for quite a lot of this book, you are reading from the perspective of a leaf or a woman who's become a leaf. So if that doesn't sound up your street, then I would give this one a miss, because you probably will not like it. But for those who like something a little bit more strange, a little bit more unusual, and if you're willing to kind of work for it and sit with something, then I would really recommend this book. It's got some really interesting ideas. It's got so many quotes that I just will continually think about. Part of the blurb for this book says that Sheila Heti is a philosopher of modern experience, and she has reimagined what a book can hold, and that is definitely true. I think that's such a good way of describing this book. So that is Pure Colour. I can't tell you much more about it because it's a bit of a mystery wrapped up in enigma. Next up, we have a book that was longlisted for the Women's Prize last year that I read and loved, and that is In Defense of the Act. This is one of those books that has one idea and just absolutely goes for it. Basically, in this book, you're following a character, a young woman who is kind of obsessed with the idea of of suicide. And a lot of her time and career, she is writing and defending the idea of suicide as not actually as bad as people are making it out to be. And she looks at it from the societal perspective, psychologically and evolutionarily speaking. But this book is written almost like in slightly diary entries, or almost like a confessional. And I just absolutely raced through it. I thought the writing was really funny and interesting. And I just completely bought in to this character and this character's ideas. And I find as soon as I am like bought in to a character wholly and fully, then that book is automatically going to be one of my new favorites. I really, really love this. So that is In Defense of the Act. The next book I want to talk about is Big Swiss. This one is a little bit different to the other ones on this list because it's slightly less serious, I would say. This book is a fun, good time, but I don't think it's going to change your life. I did want to have something that's on this list that represents that side of literary fiction that is very fun, still exploring ideas and characters very deeply, but doesn't necessarily require the same like level of brain power as some of the other ones on the list. This one is much more readable, it's much more gossipy and like more juicy as a story. You are basically reading from the perspective of Greta, who is slightly unhinged, and it makes her a very compelling story. She is a audio transcriptionist for a local sex therapist. So she basically is transcribing other people's therapy sessions, and she listens to a therapy session of this woman that she calls Big Swiss and becomes slightly obsessed with her. And that's all I'll say. I found it funny, I found it silly, and I found it touching. It's just a very good, fun time. If you like reading from slightly unhinged main characters and women just in general being messy, then I would highly recommend this one. It's a good, fun time. So that is Big Swiss. So going from slightly more lighthearted to a slightly more devastating read, the next one I want to talk about is My Dark Vanessa. This book is truly so well done. I was in awe when I was reading it. I do have to say up front that this is basically a book kind of in response to Lolita. It's a kind of a mirroring of the book of Lolita, but as if Lolita herself kind of had a voice. Because in this book, you're following Vanessa, who when she was 15 years old, got into a romantic and sexual relationship with her English teacher. And there's dual timelines in this story. You're following her as she's 15, and you're also following her as a 32-year-old, and she's looking back on this relationship. She's looking back because she is horrified by the news that someone has accused this teacher of sexual assault, and she refuses to accept this accusation and believes that this English teacher was actually her first love. This is a really uncomfortable read, and it is very dark at times and can be really difficult, but I have to commend the author because they are just such a brilliant writer. I was absolutely gripped. It was really layered. I felt so emotionally connected to this character in this book, and it is a very haunting read. It's the only way I can describe it. I would say this could definitely be something that is a really difficult read, especially for some people who might have similar experiences. I have to put it on this list, and it is one of the best books that I've ever read that covers this topic. So be warned going in, but it is an absolutely brilliant book. So that is My Dark Vanessa. And then the final book that I want to talk about is a book that I'm desperate to reread actually, because I think it's been about 4 or 5 years since I've read this, and it is Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Gyasi. And this was another one that was shortlisted for the Women's Prize back in 2021. So I think it's probably been four years since I read it. This one for me has become the touchstone or the comparison that I compare so many different books to, because none have ever achieved what this book has for me. So it has such a special place in my heart. This book is about family, and especially one main character called Gifty, and her family moved from Ghana to America. And so it follows their experience as an immigrant family. It's about family secrets and family trauma, and you're following Gifty as she is trying to understand her own identity in relation to religion and science. She's a scientist and she is studying addiction, but also she's coming to terms with her own ideas about religion as well. It's really hard to describe this book because there is so much packed into this, and I don't want to use the word transcendent, but it's hard to be like reductive enough to like explain what it's about. But I loved the writing. I just absolutely adored this book so much. And it's an unpopular opinion, but I preferred this over Homegoing actually, which is Ya Gyasi's like more famous book. So that is the final book. That is all 9 or 10. I can't remember how many I did, but that is this stack of books that I would recommend as a place to start to get into literary fiction. I'd love to know if you've read any of these books, what you thought about them. them. And also if you have any other recommendations, then please leave them down in the comments, because I'm always looking for recommendations and I always want to know what books you've been reading and loving. I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreons. Thank you so much for your support in helping this channel and being such an important part of this channel. Thank you so much. I am eternally grateful to my Patreons. I love you guys. If you are interested in joining my Patreon and becoming one of my favorite people on the planet, then the link is in the description. There is so many different perks and different tier levels depending on how much you want to donate. So that is all from me today. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like this video and subscribe and go and watch all of my other videos, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!